Minister Hogan to the House. First motion on the adjournment, Senator Jillian van Turnhout. 4 minutes, Senator.
Thank you very much. You're very welcome, Minister, and I'm delighted that it's you that has taken this matter on the adjournment. Thank you very much. I'd also like to welcome to the gallery Mary O'Connor from Kerry and Des McKiernan from Aspire. And I start with a declaration of interest. I am former Chief Executive of Children's Rights Alliance, but it is not from them that I am asking this question. It was other organisations that contacted me. As it stands, the current scheme to support national organisations which provide 30 months of core funding to 64 national community and voluntary organisations and some others is due to expire on the 31st of December this year. There is not a single name on the list of organisations in receipt of the funding that will be unfamiliar to members of this House. Indeed, I've often heard members commend from the Seanad floor many of the groups who benefit from this scheme, groups such as the Simon Community, the Alzheimer's Society, Inclusion Ireland, Bernardo's, Carmichael Centre, The Wheel, and so on. And it's evident from this handful of names that while the range of services and issues on which these groups provide advocacy is diverse, the outstanding contribution that they make to the lives of those they represent is not, thanks in part to the funding that they derive from the scheme. Minister, during my time as Chief Executive of Children's Rights Alliance and as President of the National Youth Council of Ireland, I've seen this money put to use and know how crucial it is to such organisations that they have clarity on the future of this essential funding. By denying them this, we are not only placing vital services in danger, we're also risking the very survival of some of our federations and networks who play a vital national coordination role. Yet, as I understand it to date, there has been no official communications from the Department as to the future of the scheme. Understandably, this is causing significant concern amongst the recipients' organisations. Minister, when the 2011 iteration of the scheme came about, it talked about multi-annual funding to such national organisations towards core costs associated with the provision of services. Originally, the scheme was for federations and networks programmes, and then several schemes got folded into the 2011 scheme. And I do have some concerns, Minister, with the principles behind the 2011 scheme, because I feel they actually lack a clear aim and purpose of what they're about. So maybe this is an opportunity for us to renew and to look at it. I also have concern, Minister, that some organisations receive significant funding from other arms of the state. And in each iteration of the scheme, these organisations seem to get added onto it, and I feel the scheme has lost its way. For example, Minister, I was surprised to see that the FAI received €45,000 from this scheme. Now, according to the 2011 annual review of the FAI, they received €3.4 million in grants from the Irish Sports Council and €5.7 million in sponsorship revenue. Indeed, we know that their chief executive earns €400,000, so this scheme is paying a small percentage of the chief executive's salary. To an organisation of this size operating at a surplus, the €45,000 per annum it received under the current scheme is a paltry amount. Yet to many other organisations in receipt of this money from this scheme, it would be absolutely transformative. So, Minister, I'd like you to clarify what are your current plans for the future of the 2014 to 2016, I imagine, scheme to support national organisations, to outline if and when a new scheme will be announced, what consultation process will take place with the current recipients and potential recipients. Will you give clarity to the purpose of the scheme? Because I really do believe there is a need for a scheme to support national federations and networks of charitable voluntary organisations who play a critical role in coordinating, and that funding doesn't come from other arms of the state. Minister, also, if as in previous years, will you put in place interim funding if you do not have a new successor scheme in place? And how do you see the transition to the new scheme taking place? Thank you.
I'm pleased to have the opportunity to address the Seanad on the funding scheme to support national organisations, which I thank Senator van Turnhout for raising it. But it's interesting to hear Senator van Turnhout speak about groups needing money 7 months in advance of any decisions being made, and indeed in advance of the budget, and asking me to clarify issues that actually haven't even commenced to be considered yet in the context of any review will be carried out. The funding scheme I inherited from my predecessor, a 3-year programme. Some of the problems with it you have already explained. The scheme was it amalgamated and replaced schemes that were previously operating under a white paper and supporting voluntary activity. The scheme's objective was to provide multi-annual funding to national organisations towards core costs associated with the provision of services. And that scheme, will, as I said, will cease to exist at the end of this year. A review at the time made a series of recommendations for a future funding scheme, including recommendations relating to core funding, a focus on disadvantage and coal-face services, the impact of the funding on the ground, an emphasis on adding value and avoiding duplication, and a focus on governance and cost controls. Now, these recommendations are reflected in the current funding scheme, which commenced on the 1st of July 2011. Under the current scheme, 64 organisations are supported, and funding of the order of 3.588 million is allocated to the scheme this year. My department will be carrying out a review of the scheme over the coming months. The terms of reference of the review will include an examination of the extent to which the objectives, rationale and approach of the scheme remain valid, and will entail making recommendations regarding its future scope and role. And the review of the scheme will be based on an examination of relevant documentation and consultation within the sector. It will take into account a number of policy considerations in formulating recommendations for the future. The policy considerations will include economic conditions, the principles contained within the white paper, and the role of the community and voluntary sector. And I expect to receive that review by the autumn, and on the basis of its findings, I consider the options available to me.
Just very briefly, Minister, obviously the unique part of this scheme is its multi-annual funding. There will obviously be an application process, so while 7 months seems a long time, most organisations have statutory responsibilities with regard to staff employment and would have to give staff notice. So if there's an application process, that's going to take months. And then, so actually 7 months is quite a short time. Minister, I'm very happy to help in any way. I do believe that this scheme has lost its way, and it's actually quite a mixed bag when you look at the organisations. And I do have serious concerns about organisations such as the FAI receiving from this scheme, which originally was to fund national organisations.
Second motion, Senator Donovan.
I rise tonight to ask the Minister if he could explain the reason or cause that the West Cork Community Development Partnership, or the Development Partnership, has been cut by approximately 2.2 million. In some estimates called in today's paper, the examiners 2.4 million. What we have here, Minister, in effect, is that there is a 14% cut in this budget, whereas other partnership groups in the West of Luckton have, in one instance, an increase of 58%. Projects in West Cork, such as those in Goleen, Skull, Ballyhob, Beara, Clonakilty, Bantry, that have gone through the process, are now left high and dry because of lack of funding. One must remember, Minister, I'm sure you would agree, that huge community effort